Have you ever paused, in the quiet moments of your week, to consider the rhythm that governs your life? The days pass, almost unnoticed, a relentless sequence of labor and leisure, of sunrise and sunset, of obligations that chain us to the ticking of clocks and the counting of hours. Yet among all these days, there stands one whose character has been most fiercely disputed, whose true nature has been obscured by the fog of human tradition: the Sabbath. It is a day set apart, a day that was not born of human invention but decreed by a voice higher than any earthly authority. And yet, as the centuries unfolded, it has been twisted, misunderstood, and misrepresented until many walk its hours under a shadow of falsehood, not realizing that a divine truth lies veiled beneath layers of man-made assumption. The lie of the Sabbath is not merely a small deception, nor a trivial misunderstanding. It is an affront to the very order of creation, a misalignment between humanity's heart and God's intention, which calls for not merely awareness but revelation, not merely observation but awakening. To grasp the nature of this lie, one must first understand the Sabbath as it was intended, not a burden, not a ritualistic chain, but a gift. In the beginning, the world was fashioned with care, each day ordained with purpose, each hour imbued with significance. And when the seventh day arrived, it was marked by rest, not because the Creator himself was weary, but because he wished to establish a pattern, a rhythm that would resonate through the hearts of all creation. Rest was not an arbitrary pause. It was the soul's recognition that life itself is a harmony, and to ignore this harmony is to fall into dissonance. Yet human beings, in their stubborn pride and love of invention, have often replaced the divine cadence with their own interpretations. They have made the Sabbath a point of contention, a weapon of judgment, or, most tragically, a day of empty ritual that shadows its true purpose. Herein lies the first deception. The Sabbath is portrayed as a list of restrictions rather than a sanctuary of freedom, a day that binds rather than liberates, a time measured by law rather than experienced through communion with the eternal. Consider how subtly the lie infiltrates the mind. If the Sabbath is thought of as merely a day of abstention from work, a day of counting what is forbidden rather than embracing what is holy, then it ceases to be a gift and becomes a shackle. The human spirit, which longs for rest, for renewal, for a glimpse of the eternal within the temporal, recoils at the imposition of rules that seem arbitrary, that appear designed to condemn rather than comfort. And yet, the Creator's intention is not legalistic. It is relational. The Sabbath was given so that the heart might dwell with the divine, so that time itself might be hallowed, and so that the soul might remember that life is more than the labor that consumes our waking hours. The lie, then, is a subtle inversion. The day meant to reveal God's love becomes a mirror reflecting human misunderstanding, and what is holy is rendered mundane. What is freeing becomes oppressive. What is a sanctuary becomes a trap. History itself bears witness to this distortion. As civilizations rose and fell, each added its own layer of interpretation to the Sabbath, reshaping it in accordance with cultural and political expediencies. Traditions, often well-meaning, cemented into dogmas, and over time, the divine intention became obscured beneath layers of custom and habit. The Sabbath was no longer recognized as a gift from God but as an institution to be defended, a territory of human law enforced with zeal. In this, the human heart often missed the simple beauty of the Creator's design, that one day in 7 was to be a reflection of the eternal pattern. A mirror held up to the harmony of heaven, a time when the temporal might taste of the eternal. The lie, therefore, is not merely the absence of truth. It is the active distortion of it, a turning away from clarity into confusion, a replacement of divine light with human shadow. But God, in his patience and wisdom, never leaves the lie unchallenged. Revelation, though sometimes subtle and quiet, persists. It is written into the fabric of creation itself, in the cycles of day and night, of seasons, of the rising and setting sun. Even when human beings forget, the world remembers. The Sabbath is not merely a command to be followed. It is a sign to be seen, a pattern to be recognized, a voice calling out in the chaos of human invention. Remember, I am the Lord who brings rest, who restores, who orders your days in love. And those who listen with attentive hearts begin to discern the lie, to see it not as an abstract theological error, but as a living distortion that affects the rhythm of their very existence. To perceive the Sabbath truthfully, one must also confront the consequences of the lie. A life lived without rest is a life of fragmentation, a soul divided against itself, labor without pause, consumption without reflection, activity without contemplation. All these are symptoms of a world estranged from the divine rhythm. The lie of the Sabbath masquerades as productivity or righteousness, yet it yields only weariness and spiritual emptiness. When the day intended for restoration is treated as an obligation to be endured, the spirit withers, and the very heart of creation is obscured. This is why revelation is necessary to lift the veil of misconception, to restore understanding, and to awaken the soul to the freedom inherent in obedience. The joy concealed within pause, and the peace available to those who embrace the divine pattern. God's revelation of the Sabbath is not a matter of human debate, but of experiential truth. Those who have approached the day with an open heart, who have surrendered the distractions of labor and leisure alike, have discovered that it is not merely a day of rest, but a day of encounter, a corridor of time in which heaven and earth converge. On the Sabbath, one may witness the ordinary world suffused with holiness. One may hear the whisper of eternity in the laughter of children, the songs of birds, the rustle of leaves. One may perceive that work, when paused in proper reverence, takes on a new meaning, and life, when reframed by divine rhythm, becomes a symphony rather than a cacophony. The lie, therefore, is dispelled not through argument alone, but through participation, through lived experience, through the recognition that God's intentions are restorative, not restrictive. Yet even now, the struggle persists. Many continue to live under the assumptions of the lie, measuring the Sabbath by human standards rather than divine revelation. They debate its validity, they quarrel over its timing, they cling to customs that obscure its purpose, and in doing so, they miss the invitation that lies at the heart of the day. To enter into a reality larger than themselves, to walk in step with the Creator's rhythm, to taste a foretaste of eternity within the confines of temporal life. The Sabbath is thus both a test and a gift, a test of perception, asking whether one will recognize truth beneath tradition, and a gift of grace, offering the weary soul restoration and delight. To reject the lie is not merely to reject error, it is to embrace life in its fullness, to align the human heart with the divine order, and to rediscover the wonder inherent in the world's original design. Consider the ways in which the lie has masqueraded as piety. Some have insisted that the Sabbath must be marked by meticulous observance, by rules that prioritize outward compliance over inward understanding. Others have ignored it entirely, convinced that leisure or labor can substitute for divine pattern. Both approaches, though seemingly opposed, converge in the same error, a failure to grasp that the Sabbath is a day for the soul, not merely the body, for the spirit, not merely the clock. The revelation of God's truth does not demand mere mechanical adherence, but a transformation of perspective, a realignment of the heart with the eternal, a surrender to the rhythm that mirrors creation itself. And when this truth is perceived, the soul experiences a freedom unlike any other. The freedom to rest without guilt, to reflect without distraction, to rejoice without compulsion, and to participate in a pattern that transcends time while enriching every moment within it. The lie also deceives by appealing to human pride, suggesting that one can legislate holiness through performance, that one can create divine order through personal invention. Yet the Sabbath, in its essence, refuses to be contained by human ambition. It is a reminder that the ultimate authority belongs not to the individual or to society, but to God Himself. To honor the Sabbath truthfully is to recognize the limitations of human mastery and the boundless scope of divine wisdom. It is to step aside from the endless treadmill of human effort and to glimpse the world as God intended it to be: ordered, beautiful, and suffused with significance. In this sense, The lie is more than a misunderstanding. It is a subtle rebellion, a preference for self, made patterns over divine rhythm, a choice to walk in shadow rather than light. And yet, in the midst of the lie, revelation persists. Quiet but persistent, patient but insistent. The world itself, in its cycles and seasons, bears witness to the truth, and the human heart, when attuned, cannot fail to recognize it. There is a joy, a restfulness, a restoration that cannot be manufactured, only received. There is a wisdom in stepping aside from labor, a clarity in observing the unfolding of creation without interference, and a grace in aligning one's life with the pattern laid down at the dawn of time. To see the Sabbath as God intended is to perceive a world redeemed from monotony, a life rescued from mechanical repetition, and a spirit freed from the tyranny of ceaseless activity. Thus, the Sabbath lie is revealed not merely by argument or study, but by experience, by attentiveness to the rhythm of creation, and by willingness to embrace a reality beyond human invention. It is dispelled when the soul ceases to measure the day by what it must abstain from and begins to measure it by what it may receive rest, reflection, communion, and delight. It is revealed when the heart awakens to the fact that life is more than productivity, more than duty, more than fleeting pleasure. That there exists a sacred rhythm, a divine cadence, a seventh day in which eternity touches the temporal, and that to walk in this rhythm is to walk in harmony with the Creator himself. The journey to understanding the Sabbath is thus a journey of awakening. It requires discernment to distinguish truth from lie, courage to resist the seductions of custom, patience to perceive the quiet voice of revelation, and humility to recognize that God's intentions surpass human design. And for those who undertake this journey, the reward is profound. A life imbued with meaning, a week ordered by rhythm, a soul refreshed by pause, and a heart attuned to the eternal. The Sabbath, once misunderstood, becomes once again a light in the darkness, a beacon that guides the weary traveler, and a reminder that God's love is both generous and wise, demanding not merely obedience but receptivity, not merely adherence but joy, not merely rest but participation in the divine. There exists, within the measured sequence of days and nights, a purpose that is often overlooked, a divine intention so subtle and profound that its neglect leads to weariness of spirit and confusion of the heart. This purpose is the true calling of the Sabbath, a day set apart not for burdens but for blessing, not for rules but for revelation, not for mere cessation of labor but for the awakening of the soul. The Sabbath is intended to be a mirror, reflecting not our human preoccupations, but the character and love of God himself. A time in which the temporal touches the eternal and the ordinary is suffused with the extraordinary. Yet human beings, with their unending desire to measure, regulate, and rationalize, have often obscured this calling, transforming a day of gift into a day of obligation, a sanctuary into a schedule, and a source of delight into a task to be endured. The misinterpretation of the Sabbath is not merely a matter of error in observance, but a profound misalignment of the human heart with divine purpose. And it is in this misalignment that the spiritual weariness of our age finds its explanation. Consider, for a moment, the natural rhythm of creation. The rising and setting of the sun, the turning of the seasons, the flowering and fading of the earth. All of these speak to a pattern, an order, a design that whispers the hand of a mindful creator. The Sabbath was given as an echo of this cosmic rhythm, a human reflection of the celestial pattern. It is a day when the soul is invited to pause, to look beyond the mere mechanics of life, and perceive the harmonies that underlie it. To rest on the Sabbath is not to retreat from reality, but to engage with it at its deepest level, to acknowledge that the world is not a mere collection of tasks to be completed, but a living expression of divine wisdom. And yet, because the Sabbath has so often been construed as a legal requirement rather than an invitation, many approach it with anxiety rather than anticipation, with obligation rather than openness, with rules rather than wonder. In this approach, the Sabbath's true purpose is concealed, and the human spirit, deprived of the nourishment it was meant to receive, grows listless and distracted. The first step toward understanding the true purpose of the Sabbath is to recognize the profound difference between mere rest and Sabbath rest. Ordinary rest is a cessation of physical activity, a relief from toil, a momentary pause before labor resumes. Sabbath rest, by contrast, is not merely physical but spiritual, not merely temporal but eternal. It is an intentional alignment of human consciousness with the divine, a recognition that the world is larger than our immediate concerns, that time itself can be sanctified, and that the soul can partake of a rhythm beyond human invention. It is in this rhythm that reflection finds its home, where contemplation is honored, and where the heart is given space to perceive truth unclouded by distraction. Those who approach the Sabbath with this understanding experience it not as a day of duty, but as a day of revelation, a corridor of time in which God's character, His order, His mercy, and His creativity become perceptible in ways otherwise unnoticed. Human misinterpretation of the Sabbath often arises from a desire to control holiness through external measures. Rules are constructed, schedules imposed, and observances enforced, all under the guise of obedience, yet all too frequently this leads to the very opposite of the Sabbath's intention. A day meant to cultivate joy can become a source of guilt. A day meant to nurture the soul can become a chain upon it, and a day intended for freedom can feel like confinement. This distortion is not accidental. It is the natural consequence of attempting to contain divine wisdom within human frameworks. God's purposes transcend human understanding, and the Sabbath is a reminder of that transcendence. To encounter it authentically is to submit not to a rule book, but to a rhythm, to participate in a pattern that preexists human invention, and that continues to speak to the attentive heart across generations. Reflection is one of the central gifts of the Sabbath, yet it is also one of the aspects most endangered by misunderstanding. In a world that prizes constant activity and measurable accomplishment, reflection is often undervalued, regarded as idle or indulgent. And yet, reflection is precisely what allows the soul to perceive divine intention. On the Sabbath, the soul is given the opportunity to pause and examine the course of its own life, to consider not only what it has accomplished, but what it has received, what it has overlooked, and what it has failed to cherish. The Sabbath, in this way, functions as a mirror of both the self and the Creator. It reveals human need and divine generosity, human frailty and divine faithfulness. To neglect this aspect is to impoverish one's life, to treat a day of encounter as a day of routine, and to ignore the subtle ways in which God's character is revealed through rest, observation, and contemplation. God's revelation of the Sabbath is inseparable from the recognition of His character. In the act of resting, of stepping aside from labor and worry, the human soul is invited to understand attributes of God otherwise abstract or unseen. Patience, provision, creativity, care, and wisdom. All these are reflected in the Sabbath's design. The act of rest itself is a lesson in divine sufficiency. The world continues, life endures, and the soul is sustained not by unceasing effort, but by trust in the order established by the Creator. In this, the Sabbath becomes a teacher, offering instruction not through words alone, but through experience, allowing the heart to perceive lessons in rhythm, restraint, and reverence. To misunderstand the Sabbath is to miss these lessons, to deprive oneself of the profound education that comes from aligning with the Creator's own cadence. The Sabbath also offers revelation in its provision of delight. When observed with understanding, it becomes a day suffused with joy, a celebration of life's goodness, a recognition that existence itself is a gift. Labor may occupy 6 days, but the 7th is a festival, an opportunity to rejoice in creation, to find pleasure in relationships, to indulge in the beauty of the world without guilt or haste. This joy is not trivial or superficial. It is a deep recognition that the soul is part of a greater design, that work and play, effort and pause, activity and contemplation are meant to complement each other in a harmonious whole. To experience this joy is to glimpse the divine heart, to understand that God's intention for humanity encompasses not only duty but delight, not only obedience but satisfaction, not only toil but wonder. Yet the Sabbath's revelation is not only inward but outward. By observing the day, the human heart is drawn into alignment with the broader patterns of creation and community. The Sabbath was intended to be both personal and communal, a day when individuals find restoration and when societies recognize the value of shared pause, mutual care, and collective attention to the eternal. In this sense, the Sabbath functions as a corrective to the isolating tendencies of human ambition and distraction. It reminds communities that life is not merely a series of individual endeavors, but a tapestry woven together by relationships, by shared rhythms, and by recognition of a common source. Misunderstanding this communal aspect is to miss a dimension of the Sabbath's purpose, reducing it to private observance rather than a collective encounter with the divine. Moreover, the Sabbath invites contemplation of the eternal within the temporal. Each hour of the day, each moment of stillness, offers a glimpse of truths that surpass the fleeting concerns of human life. Eternity is made perceptible not through speculation alone, but through experience, through deliberate alignment with the rhythms ordained by God. By stepping into the Sabbath, the human soul is granted the perspective necessary to see life in context, to perceive the fleeting nature of immediate worries, and to recognize the permanence of divine order. This is revelation in its most profound sense, an unveiling of truth that transforms not merely knowledge but perception, not merely understanding but the lived experience of existence. Humanity's frequent failure to perceive the Sabbath accurately is, in part, a reflection of our broader tendency to substitute action for understanding. We busy ourselves with obligations, with schedules, with measurable output, believing that productivity equates to virtue. And yet we often neglect the deeper work of the soul. The Sabbath calls us to a different labor, the labor of attention, of awareness, of receptivity. It is a day when the soul works in ways that are invisible but no less real, when reflection, gratitude, prayer, and contemplation constitute the true measure of achievement. To neglect this labor is to misunderstand the Sabbath entirely, to mistake rest for idleness, and to deprive oneself of the restoration intended by the Creator. In recovering the true purpose of the Sabbath, one also recovers a sense of balance. Life, when lived without pause, becomes a relentless march, a succession of demands that leave the spirit exhausted. The Sabbath, by contrast, introduces a rhythm that allows the heart to breathe, the mind to settle, and the soul to align with the divine pattern. This balance is not a human convenience, but a reflection of the cosmic order: 6 days of labor, 1 day of rest, a rhythm that mirrors creation itself and invites humanity to participate consciously in a pattern larger than itself. Observing this rhythm is an act of trust, an acknowledgement that life is not meant to be mastered through ceaseless effort, but harmonized with the wisdom and care inherent in the world's design. Finally, the Sabbath teaches that revelation and obedience are not mutually exclusive. To honor the day is not simply to follow a rule, but to enter into understanding, to allow one's life to be shaped by insight, and to experience the fullness of life as intended by the Creator. Misinterpretation may lead to bondage or neglect, but correct perception leads to freedom, clarity, and joy. It is through this revelation that humanity grasps the depth of divine love, a love that structures time, that ordains patterns of rest and renewal, that calls the heart to awareness, and that offers the soul the gift of restoration in the midst of life's inevitable toil. Thus, to rediscover the Sabbath is to rediscover a hidden truth, a divine pattern that aligns the human heart with eternal wisdom. It is to embrace rest as more than absence of labor, reflection as more than idle thought, and revelation as more than intellectual assent. The Sabbath calls us to a living experience of God's character, to an encounter that restores, instructs, delights, and sustains. In reclaiming its true purpose, we reclaim not merely a day of the week but a rhythm of life, a measure of spiritual health, and a glimpse of the eternal woven into the fabric of time itself. There is a profound truth hidden in the rhythm of time, a subtle yet undeniable pattern woven into the very fabric of creation, which speaks of order, of purpose, and of the divine authority that governs all things. The Sabbath, far from being a mere day of cessation, stands as a witness to this order and a reflection of the eternal. It is a signal that proclaims God's sovereignty, His love, and His care for all creation, a rhythm set into the world before human beings could impose their own schedules, a cadence that speaks across generations with quiet insistence. The world is not chaos, life is not accidental, and there exists a reality higher than the fleeting demands of human concern. And yet, because humanity has so often misunderstood, ignored, or distorted this rhythm, the Sabbath's role as witness has been diminished, leaving the human heart estranged from the divine melody that gives life its truest meaning. To perceive the Sabbath rightly is to perceive the eternal within the temporal, to see the hand of God in the measured passing of hours, and to allow the soul to align with a pattern far greater than itself. The Sabbath's testimony begins in creation itself. 6 days of labor, each day marked by formation, growth, and flourishing, culminating in a 7th day that was sanctified, not by exhaustion, but by intention. This day of rest is more than a pause, it is a declaration, a proclamation that life, in its fullness, requires balance, reflection, and recognition of the eternal. By resting, humanity participates in the testimony of creation, acknowledging that the world is neither random nor purely utilitarian, but ordered according to the wisdom and love of its Maker. In this recognition, the Sabbath becomes a lens through which we may perceive not only the world but also the character of God, His provision, His foresight, His care, and His delight in what He has made. To ignore this witness is to blind oneself to the harmony of the universe, to live as if time were a series of disconnected moments rather than a tapestry of meaning woven by divine design. Humanity, however, has long struggled to recognize this witness. The demands of survival, ambition, and social convention have crowded the Sabbath into obscurity, or have distorted it into something unrecognizable. Some have reduced it to mere observance, a checklist of do's and don'ts, a legalistic measure of piety divorced from understanding. Others have abandoned it entirely, convinced that leisure or productivity can substitute for sacred rhythm. Both approaches, though outwardly different, share the same consequence. They obscure the testimony that the Sabbath was meant to offer. The day becomes a shadow, its witness dimmed, its revelation muted, and the human heart, deprived of alignment with divine order, grows restless and disoriented. The Sabbath, when misperceived, ceases to instruct, uplift, or guide. It becomes background noise in the life of the distracted and the hurried. To understand the Sabbath as a witness, one must first perceive the nature of testimony itself. A witness does not speak merely for the sake of utterance. It bears evidence, offers insight, and affirms truth. The Sabbath bears witness to God's authority by demonstrating that life is more than human labor, that time itself is sacred, and that the world's rhythms are governed by a wisdom far beyond our own. It testifies to God's love by providing rest, restoration, and delight, offering humanity a space to experience His care in tangible, experiential ways. And it witnesses to eternity by pointing the soul toward realities that surpass the temporary, inviting reflection on life's ultimate purposes and the permanence of divine order. Those who heed this witness discover that the Sabbath is not a day to be endured but a revelation to be embraced, a living testimony that transforms perception, informs action, and nurtures the spirit. The Sabbath's role as witness is intimately connected with its function as a marker of authority. Time, when measured by human convention alone, can become arbitrary, manipulable, and fleeting. Yet the Sabbath, established by God at the dawn of creation, reminds humanity that there exists an authority higher than itself, a rhythm that is neither invented nor subject to whim. To observe the Sabbath is to acknowledge that human endeavor, though meaningful, is ultimately subordinate to divine wisdom. That the passing hours are part of a design greater than immediate concerns, and that obedience to this pattern brings alignment with the eternal rather than mere compliance with regulation. The witness of the Sabbath thus carries both instruction and correction. It reveals the limits of human control and points toward the sufficiency of divine provision, offering guidance not through coercion but through the evidence of ordered time itself. Moreover, the Sabbath as witness reveals the eternal in the temporal. In the quiet of a sacred day, the ordinary world is imbued with significance. A sunrise, a shared meal, a moment of contemplation, all become opportunities to perceive the ongoing presence of God in creation. The Sabbath teaches that every aspect of life, when viewed through the lens of sacred rhythm, contains a reflection of eternity. Labor is not meaningless, play is not trivial, and relationships are not superficial. All are threads in a tapestry that extends beyond the confines of hours and days into the realm of the everlasting. Misinterpretation of the Sabbath obscures this perspective, leaving humanity to measure life solely by what is immediate and tangible. Yet the witness of the day continues, waiting for attention, for receptivity, for the heart willing to perceive its testimony. Community, too, is central to the Sabbath's witness. The day was designed not only for personal reflection, but also for shared experience, offering a collective recognition of divine order. Families, neighbors, and communities, when gathered in rest and contemplation, participate in a rhythm that transcends individual existence, reinforcing the bonds that connect humanity within creation's broader pattern. The Sabbath, therefore, functions as both personal and societal testimony. It teaches the individual about God's authority, and it teaches society about the value of pause, attention, and mutual recognition of what is holy. To neglect this communal aspect is to diminish the Sabbath's power, reducing a day of witness to mere private observance, and in doing so, to miss the opportunity to experience the richness of shared alignment with the eternal. The Sabbath also bears witness through its restorative power. By withdrawing from continuous labor, the human body, mind, and spirit are allowed to regain equilibrium. This restoration is more than physical, it is moral, emotional, and spiritual. In a world where activity often becomes its own reward, the Sabbath demonstrates that life's rhythms are designed to include pauses. That rest is not weakness but recognition of necessity, and that renewal is integral to sustainable engagement with creation. This restorative aspect serves as evidence of care of the Sabbath, is a gift intended for flourishing, a signal that life is meant to be balanced, and a living testimony that divine wisdom encompasses both work and rest. Misreading the Sabbath, whether through neglect or legalism, deprives the observer of this restorative witness, leaving the spirit fatigued and the heart unrefreshed. Delight is another dimension of the Sabbath's testimony. A day set apart is a day to celebrate creation, to experience joy, and to participate in pleasures that reflect God's goodness. The witness of delight is subtle, but profound. It shows that the Creator values enjoyment as well as effort, beauty as well as utility, and participation as well as production. When the Sabbath is observed with understanding, it transforms ordinary moments into reflections of divine creativity, imbuing meals, conversation, music, and nature with the sacred quality of intentional celebration. The day's witness is thus multifaceted, encompassing authority, provision, restoration, and joy, each dimension pointing back to the character of God and the eternal order He has established. The Sabbath also serves as a teacher of perspective. In stepping aside from the incessant demands of labor, humanity gains the vantage necessary to see life more clearly. Priorities are clarified, distractions fade, and the soul is able to perceive what truly matters. This perspective is both humbling and enlightening. It reminds humans of their place within creation, their dependence on divine provision, and the fleeting nature of temporal concerns. The Sabbath's witness, therefore, is pedagogical. It instructs by experience, teaching lessons that cannot be captured in words alone, and shaping understanding through lived engagement with sacred time. Those who embrace the Sabbath with attentive hearts find their perspective transformed, seeing work, rest, relationships, and responsibilities in a light informed by divine order rather than human impatience. Misinterpretation of the Sabbath, however, obscures all these lessons. When the day is reduced to legalistic observance, forgotten entirely, or approached with indifference, its testimony remains unheard. Humanity may continue its labors unaware of the rhythm that gives life coherence, may seek pleasure without perceiving joy, and may pursue activity without understanding purpose. Yet the Sabbath endures, quietly calling attention, offering witness, and inviting alignment with a truth that surpasses temporal concerns. Even when misunderstood, the day's testimony persists, awaiting those willing to listen, to reflect, and to respond. Ultimately, the Sabbath bears witness to a reality that cannot be fully captured by human reasoning. The intersection of time and eternity, the convergence of creation and creator, and the opportunity for life to reflect divine pattern. It calls humanity to awareness, to gratitude, and to obedience that is informed by understanding rather than mere compulsion. It demonstrates that existence is meaningful, labor is dignified, and rest is sacred. In doing so, it offers a glimpse of eternity in the midst of temporal life, a reminder that the rhythms ordained at creation continue to hold significance for all who are willing to perceive them. In embracing the Sabbath as witness, humanity recovers not only a day, but a vision of life ordered by divine wisdom, infused with delight, balanced in labor and rest, and aligned with eternal truths. This vision transforms not merely individual days but entire lives, shaping hearts, directing minds, and nurturing spirits. The Sabbath, misunderstood, may seem a limitation. Understood, it becomes a revelation, a declaration, and a guide. Its witness speaks across time, calling all who are willing to pause, to reflect, and to perceive that life, in its truest sense, is lived not merely in the pursuit of tasks, but in the alignment of human existence with the eternal order of God. Thus, the Sabbath remains a silent yet eloquent witness, a signal in the passage of time, a proclamation of divine authority, a mirror reflecting the eternal in the temporal, and a call to live with intention, obedience, and spiritual awareness. Those who heed its testimony discover not mere compliance but liberation, not mere rest but restoration, not mere days counted but lives illuminated by the rhythm of heaven itself. And in doing so, they partake in a reality that transcends the fleeting concerns of the week, finding in the Sabbath a continuous echo of creation's original design and a living testimony to the God who orders all things with wisdom, care, and love.